Welcome to the new 9-2Y School of Music series, Inside the Concert. I'm Naomi Lewin, former host of Afternoon Music on WQXR and host of the weekly radio feature and podcast Classics for Kids. Inside the Concert takes a deeper dive into some of the repertoire from 9-2Y's Marshall Weinberg Spring 2021 Classical Music Season, which is a series of concerts from the stage of the Kaufman Concert Hall that will be streamed online. On Sunday, March 14th, star violinist Gil Shaham, ta-da! Wave, Gil. Don't confuse people, Colin. Wave, Gil, please. Gil Shaham will perform with members of the Knights, the extraordinary instrumental ensemble founded by cellist conductor Eric Jacobson. Eric, wave, please, so that we know who you are. Great. And violinist composer Colin Jacobson. The program includes arrangements of two pieces by Beethoven, his violin concerto, and the overture to The Creatures of Prometheus, plus a string quartet by Joseph Bologne. That concert will be streamed live at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on March 14th, and then it will be available online for another week. There's a link to get tickets on the YouTube page and in chat. Tonight, I am thrilled to welcome Gil Shaham, Eric Jacobson, and Colin Jacobson as the first guests to Inside the Concert. We are going to talk about Beethoven's violin concerto with some musical illustration and some time to answer your questions towards the end of the hour. So please put anything you would like to ask Gil, Eric, or Colin into chat. My first question, Colin and Eric, what's the story behind the name The Knights? Now, are we talking King Arthur or musicians on horseback? Or did you know when you founded the group that there would be a year when we would all be performing in sort of the visor part of a helmet all over our faces?
It's very good. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us. So happy to be here with you talking. And Gil, it's always such a pleasure to see you virtually. I mean, not in person, but virtually, it's pretty good.
Right back at all of you.
The Knights is a group of people who've been playing music together and have a very similar shared value system musically for a long time. The word The Knights does come, believe it or not, from a time many years ago, maybe over 20 years ago, when we were giving our first concert. It happened to be at pre-college at Juilliard. It was when I was studying at Juilliard, pre-college. And I was asked, what's the name of the group? Because I'd put together this group with my brother to perform, maybe 20 friends. And they said, what's the name of the group? We need to print it on the program. And I thought, I had been reading this King Arthur book. And I said, The Knights of the Many-Sided Table, which didn't stick.
Good thing.
But it kind of had, even though the name was used for a while, that long name, if you're not into the whole brevity thing, it started becoming The Knights. And people used to start saying that, and it was the group. And we talked about it. After the group started performing more concerts and actually touring and becoming a group, we said, brought all the musicians together, hey, should we change our name? Is this a joke? Is this meant to be serious? Does this embody what we want? And I think the truth is the name ends up being the group, and the group ends up being the name. Yes, there's clearly a version of the name The Knights that stands for the heroic quest. The journey never ends. The decision making, all for the sake of trying to find the better good of something. But also, it's just our name. And after 20 years, it's what we are, and it has been more or less something that we come together with joy, and it represents that joy and friends being together. So now it's really about that, even though it does have maybe some medieval beginning. It's now just who we are.
Colin, have you been part of this since? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just to add, I feel like it really got solidified at one point. We were on tour in Germany, and we were doing a residency where we did a lot of work with kids at Ludwigshafen, I believe, and or Ludwigsburg, one of those. But Ludwig is the pertinent thing because the facilitator for this encounter with the students decided to turn. We were playing Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and decided to turn it into. And I'm not going to use the right German pronouns because Eric can help. These are the nights. These are the nights. You know, and she got the whole audience, you know, like 2,000 kids to all be saying that. And we're like, okay, we are the Knights now for sure. You know?
That's excellent. And Gil, how and when did you start performing with the Knights?
Well, I want to say thank you for having me too. It's wonderful to be with you. And, you know, Colin and Eric, this is the first time I've heard that story. I love that. That is fantastic. I guess somehow maybe Colin and myself and my wife, Adele Anthony, who's a violinist, we overlapped at school together. And it was through Colin that we met Eric. And then actually both Adele and myself worked with the Knights. When was it now? Was it 12 years ago, 13 years ago?
I think 12. I think you're right. Yeah.
We were doing lots of Sarasate goodness, and we got to play with Gil at the Poisson Rouge.
So everybody just kind of got sucked into this in a good way?
Yeah.
So wonderful. Yeah, and we played at Poisson Rouge, which is, how would you describe that? It's not a traditional classical
music nightclub.
It's like a nightclub, right?
It's a classical music nightclub.
And I got to hear some other performances. Maybe is it called Brick in Brooklyn?
Yeah.
Of the
Knights.
night.
Where we were in residence for a few years, and
you know, and these guys are just like great masters of music. You know, just undeniable chops, and then they let go and they go outside the box and they perform in maybe different venues and they do different programs. And yeah, we had a great time playing Sarasate. Colin and I, if I remember, at some point we played Sarasate in Navarra together?
Yeah, on a tour where we were doing also the Prokofiev concerto with you, and the orchestra was playing Eroica Symphony.
Well,
yeah.
Speaking of Beethoven, Eroica, not Eroica, you all collectively have a new recording together that's coming out on March 12th, Gil Shaham, soloist with the Knights, which includes both the Beethoven, yes, hold it up so we can all see it.
I'm just showing this because it literally came in the mail today, so I'm very excited.
Excellent. It includes both the Beethoven and the Brahms violin concertos, and there is a link, I believe, in chat and or YouTube with information on how to get that CD and a slight discount for having been part of this whole discussion this evening. So, and I have listened to it, and it is wonderful and amazing, as my nieces would say. But Gil, this is truly the first time you've recorded the Beethoven concerto. What took you so long?
Yes. Yeah, you know, everything just at I don't know, at my age, it seems like it all goes in a blink of an eye, you know. And I guess I hadn't recorded the Beethoven violin concerto before. It was one of those pieces that I knew since I was a child. I remember being maybe even as young as 10 or 11, sitting at home, listening to recordings of the Beethoven violin. I just loved, we had a recording of David Oistrakh playing, and there's a wonderful moment where the orchestra plays the melody and the violin accompanies in these beautiful triplets, these flowing triplets. And I just would listen to that over and over and over again. So I always knew it. And then it was part of our education, you know, at Juilliard and elsewhere. So as a teenager, I learned the piece. And then I didn't really start performing it till I was in my, I would say, late 20s, early 30s. There's kind of a feeling about Beethoven. I guess everybody feels so passionately about this music, you know. People have strong opinions. I do too, you know, but everybody else does. And everybody loves it. And I guess that could be intimidating, you know.
Eric and Colin, you grew up with a father who played the violin. So did you grow up with this piece in the house? Was this like imprinted on you in utero?
For sure. Well, for him, there was one violinist, and that was Heifetz. So that's what we grew up with.
Oh, that's wonderful recording. That's
which is wonderful, also, of course. And I should also I'm just thinking about back to those years. I mean, so we met with the Knights years later and in school, but the first time I ever heard Gil was at the Unitarian Church in Garden City, where Bruce Adolph, the composer and educator, still has a series that he runs with his wife, Maria Stroke. So I was about 8, and I think Gil was 14 or something like that. And I remember being blown away then. And then years later, but it was, it's this important thing when you're a young violinist to see people who are not ancient violinists, but are like a little bit older than you. And you say, wow, that's amazing. And some of that I could imagine doing, some of that I can't, but you work at it and you get there. So it's nice to go back to those early memories of both the Beethoven and first hearing Gil.
Wow.
This concerto does not sound like any violin concerto that came before it, does it? I mean, for starters, the first movement is over twice as long as either of the other movements.
Absolutely.
About how this piece, before that there was like Mozart and Haydn, pretty concertos, but all of a sudden it's Beethoven.
Yeah, I mean, I guess with Beethoven, it's an often used word to say revolutionary, and this piece is revolutionary in so many ways. And as you say, nothing like it came before, and in the scope, in the length of it, in the size of the orchestra, in the emotional journey on which it takes you. It really is kind of massive compared to concertos that came before. And I think Beethoven was in the zone. He was hitting one home run after the did you guys see that video of Steph Curry in practice hitting like 110 3-pointers in a row? Something crazy. I think that's kind of what Beethoven was up to at that time. He was in the composer's zone, and
Fourth Symphony, Fifth Symphony.
That's all the same year, right? Just one thing after the other. For many years, I think many people felt like I did, that there is something just awesome about the perfection, awe-inspiring about the perfection of Beethoven's work. There's a wonderful lecture by Leonard Bernstein where he says, I'm going to get this wrong, but he says something like, with Beethoven, you hear the surprising next note and you realize it had to be that note. It's the exact right note, and no note is out of place. Every note is exactly where it should be. And it's true, there is this incredible feeling of perfection with Beethoven. But nowadays, I think of Beethoven's genius as being much greater than that. I think that he would just sit down at the piano and out it would come. That's just how he improvised. Everything that came out was already thought through so well and so perfect. And that's the case with this violin concerto. And I think he was just so fluent that he could take it to the next level and create, as you say, a piece that changed the genre forever.
Eric and Colin, you have anything to add about the nature of this concerto? Eric, we've lost your sound.
Sorry, I was on mute. I still can't, after a whole year, I still can't get it right. I feel like the nature, the scope, the largeness, the heroic nature of this piece is something that it was a moment that changed, right? And I think it's one of the reasons that Gil often talks about how it inspired the Brahms Violin Concerto, because it was a moment in time that changed. And this piece, the thing that I love listening to it is how he's able to create the hero out of the solo violin, but also within the midst of the orchestra, creating such a chorus. Yes, it's an orchestra, but sometimes it just sounds like the song, us all being together, something that we miss right now, the singing of being in a room together. And I think, for me, I've been more recently thinking about that and how it relates to the Brahms, and how being so inspired by an artwork from 75 years ago, 100 years ago, that you would then have to write your version of it. But a totally different piece, but an ode to a heroism from that time, and now being able to bring it to the modern day, to Brahms's modern day, and say, this is what it has made me think about. And I'm going to write something completely unique, even though it's based on the beauty and the history of this Beethoven.
We'll get to the Brahms in just a little bit, but I'd like to delve a little bit more into the Beethoven. The new CD has terrific program notes by Styra Avens, who is she is the best. And I loved her suggestion that the opening line for the soloist is like a fiddler sort of tuning up, warming up, testing the room. Do you agree with that, you violinists? Well, you're all string players. Does it feel like that to you too?
Gil.
No, Colin, you go ahead.
Okay, I mean, I'll just say yes. I mean, it's it picks it, like the orchestra has done this 4-minute long tutti, and the violinist has had to stand there, and just kind of look at the audience and look inside themselves. And then he doesn't give you the Brahms opening, which is so, you get to lay in right away. Instead, Beethoven, after all that, etc. And it does feel like, actually, my violin just went way out too.
Does one of you want to play what Beethoven actually wrote?
The point being that I think there is something to just like intoning. And that's a thing with improvisation. You don't start necessarily with the most complex thing, but you start with just the simple chords and scales and set up the expectation. Now, excuse me.
Yeah. Gil, do you want to play the actual opening?
Well, I will say yes. We were so lucky to have Styra Avens
amazing
to work on the notes for this CD, and I've been so privileged to speak with her and discuss these pieces with her. Styra uses the word preludizing, which I love. I guess if I remember, there were contests of Beethoven's improvisation with other musicians where he talks about preludizing. And, I guess the idea was the orchestra plays, the introduction. And it freezes on a dominant 7th chord. And then the violinist, sort of takes a flight of fancy. And only then the story really begins. Only then does the timpani start again. Those 4 drum beats that started the whole piece. And, Styra says maybe this is a way to have the violinist warm up to the room, to test out the instrument, to see what the acoustics are like. And I suppose it probably helps the listener too. You have a whole symphony orchestra playing, and then you suddenly have this tension of the 5/7 chord. To my ear, it reminds me of some 5/7s in the Ninth Symphony, and it's very tense, and it's 5/7, and then suddenly this new sound sneaks in, the sound of a solo violin, and really that's how he eases us in, everybody in the room, into a violin concerto. And I loved when Eric used the word protagonist, because I think it really is all about storytelling, and it is a drama. And yes, there is a violin, maybe the solo violin is the protagonist, but there are many, many different characters. And Beethoven was, again, revolutionary and so experimental. There are times when it's just violin and horns, the violin accompanying the melody and the horns, or the soloist accompanying the orchestra happens very few times. But in general, violin and timpani, this kind of.
Ask for some examples. Yeah, well, that's the whole second movement. Well, I was going to go through it movement, but what you're talking about right now, that second movement, yes, it's like the orchestra that has a chorale tune, and the violin is just sort of embellishing around it. You want to.
The violinist never plays the tune.
Yeah.
Maybe similarly to the Brahms a little bit, but in the Beethoven, right, there's a set of variations. It's a wonderful, inspired movement, and I know of no other movement like it. The Larghetto, where Beethoven has this set of variations, 3 very soft variations, maybe the softest in all of Beethoven. And I have a little story about that I think maybe Eric knows, but it's a very soft variation, 3 soft variations, a very loud variation, and the violinist never plays the melody, just sort of comment here, a comment there. And after those variations, the violinist finally comes in with a little kind of improvisation again. As if I have a secret, I have something to add. They've repeated this chant, but I have something else to say. And finally, the soloist launches into the soloist melody. Only the violinist plays this melody. And it really is somehow a very clear drama, between the role of the violinist and the roles of others in the orchestra.
So when I was just going to ask, I don't want to interrupt. No, if you have something else to say.
No, I was just, going to muse about, and this is only musing, and I wouldn't be the first one to muse thusly, but that with the times that he was living in, and we're living in some strange and a time of a lot of change, rapid change. And I think that was the time Beethoven found himself in. And I think that's where this idea of his idea of the hero, which we know through Eroica, he thought Napoleon could be that person to lift people up and break the chains that they were in, but then he became emperor, and we know that story. But I think, that just that idea of what is a hero and how, and a leader, and what a leader should represent to the rest of the citizenry seems very, whether it's conscious or unconscious, it's probably both. But in the violin concerto, we have this example of the violin soaring on the wings of what the orchestra is doing, and Beethoven basically saying to that soloist, be everything you can be, embrace it all of humanity, but don't get full of yourself. I'm not giving you that theme,
So my question to Eric, I guess, is, because I don't know whether your conducting style is sort of more authoritarian or more democratic, but when you rehearse this concerto, who spoken like a true brother, when you rehearse this concerto, who followed whom? Was there a, who had the ideas and who said, no, 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 you ignorant slut? Eric?
It's a very good question. I think there are various forms of a relationship in that feeling of orchestra, soloist, conductor. And I have this thought that soloists who are young or haven't done so many solos yet, there's a little bit of, being green and first time with an orchestra. I practiced my part. I'm really trying so hard. I need you to follow me. I need you to, because I have control over what I've practiced, but I can't add the element of this 40-piece orchestra and all these things. So follow me. And then they're really good soloists who really want to follow you because they know you follow a conductor, well, the orchestra's going to play together and the soloist will be together. Everything will come together and it'll be easier. And then there are really great soloists that say, oh yeah, I'll follow you, but they're kind of using the Jedi mind trick to let you know what they're doing 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 10 minutes ahead, so that you actually are really on the same mind, same level, same conversation consistently. And maybe that goes both ways. I would hope that, that when playing with Gil, he can smell me as much as I could smell him, because I could smell him. And I mean, in a positive sense, like I really know the wind is going this way right now. And I love that because last time it didn't go that way. And I love the idea of the chance for change. And I'll say the first time we toured with Gil, it was after we recorded the Prokofiev Violin Concerto. This was 5 years ago or so. We toured it. And I was so excited that every single night was the same in that it was different. Every single night had the challenge of, hey, it's going to be this way right now. And nothing that would be for the sake of change. Change for the sake of change, maybe not a good thing in general, but change for the sake of questions and searching and the quest, always a good thing. And that's sort of my joy of communication as a conductor definitely comes back to being a cellist in a string quartet, which is you are both the most important and you are both the fourth most important. Like you're either leading it or you're following it, but actually it's all at the same time. Everyone is equally important at every moment. And same goes for an orchestra. Everything on stage that's happening is equally important. How do we all come together with the goal of communication to an audience? And so I'll say there are definitely clear times on stage that I'm not holding the baton, but a member of the wind section is holding the baton. And then there's times when it's really Gil and we are all trying so hard to put our brains, our ears, our eyes 95% on Gil and 5% to do the task that we have to do. And then there's Bill Collins, concertmaster, and he's actually communicating with the entire orchestra because I'm here with Gil and I'm not listening. I haven't heard this. And so it's, I think it's one of those things like you see 10 cars all at the same speed and one goes a foot forward and one comes back and then the next one goes. And it's kind of this beautiful ballet of leadership.
And Colin, okay to sit in the orchestra with your kid brother up there waving his arms, telling you what to do?
Oh yeah, it's so much fun.
You're not helping us.
Yes. It's the best thing. I mean, and we've been doing it for so long, so it's just very deep,
I have to say, when you have musicians who are of such mastery, when you have people who are so accomplished, like Colin and Eric, and the Knights, it really is. It's a different experience. It's really a different level from leading or following or.
It is a truly gorgeous recording.
Oh, thank you.
I'm listening to this.
I mean, they really, it's like watching, a great sports team, people who are really at the top of their game, who are bouncing off each other and, are so in tune on a split second level and literally breathing together. So, yeah, I was very honored and happy and privileged to be part of that.
The Beethoven Violin Concerto was not a success when it premiered, which was in 1806. Why do you think that was? Because it's not like people didn't like new music back then.
Well, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I think it did have some moderate success. Beethoven, I believe, wrote this for the violinist Franz Clement, and who was a renowned virtuoso of the day. And the legend was that the ink was still drying on the page of the musicians the morning of the rehearsal, and that Franz Clement virtually sight read the solo part. If you can imagine such a thing. But there was apparently a substantial ovation after the first movement, and Clement then turned.
Really catch on.
That's exactly right. Clement apparently after the first movement turned to the audience and held his violin upside down, I think, and did some sort of violin party trick of playing some improvisation on one string only or something. I believe those were the reports. I may be wrong. I don't want to say the wrong thing.
I was thrilled by that too.
And then they played the second and third movement. And as you say, afterwards, Beethoven's Violin Concerto was somewhat neglected. It was not performed as much as one would think. And it was really thanks to Joseph Joachim,
right,
who picked it up later.
He was 12. He wasn't even 13 years old yet. Talk about Gil performing the concerto when he was 14. Joachim was 12, 1 month shy of 13, when Mendelssohn conducted the London Philharmonic.
Yes.
And then it was a success. So 40 years later, why do you think people were ready to embrace it then?
Might be just at that point, I think Beethoven's reputation was so established. He was such an icon. He wasn't a composer who died, with no one knowing about him. He did have fame in his lifetime, but I think the Violin Concerto, if you look at the other concerti of the day, often they're virtuoso vehicles for showmanship in a lot of ways, and those can be really fun too. But they just have a different value system than what was easily digestible. I think Beethoven's challenge in the Violin Concerto isn't even that it's complex. It is long, the form is long, but the actual material is so simple as for someone to maybe in the time was like, I'm tuning out because they're not getting into what is the message behind the music. And I think that's still a difficult thing because I think people come expecting for Beethoven always to blow you away with the stormy Fifth Symphony, but here in the Violin Concerto he really lets things just unfold in such a beautiful way.
At the time, Beethoven was writing for a new and improved violin and bow in his era, just like he wrote for an evolving new and improved piano when he wrote his piano music. What could the newer violin and bow do that the older ones couldn't? Can you demonstrate a little bit of that, maybe?
It's a good question, and I don't profess to know exactly, but I think that the major innovation was the bow. The Tourt bow came later. If you think of even 50 years earlier, they still had the round bow, or what I think it was Leopold Mozart called the round bow in the violin book, and Tourt, Tourt came up with this kind of, is that concave or convex or?
I always get them confused.
Yeah.
Convex.
Holds water.
Wood is.
Wow. Yes.
Double jointed. But it's also longer than the bow used to be, right?
So it's a longer bow, so you could play longer notes. And also, when you have a bow that's curved this way, what happens to the hair is, here, I'll put the violin down. The hair is pulled, right? So when it hits the string, there's resistance against it. The other way, it sort of gave into the string, so you were able to do some very immediate articulations this way. And there was also maybe a greater range of articulations.
So you get more bite in the sound?
There could be more bite. There could be more bouncy strokes, things like that. Even those high notes were possible because the fingerboard, this black board here, was longer than before. So whereas, maybe before this would be your highest note, something like that. In the Beethoven violin concerto, he took it on. He took it that much higher. There's also, I guess when I was thinking about this, I think we often have a hard time imagining some of these revolutions like the Mannheim crescendo. If you think about the instruments before, if you think of a harpsichord or an organ where you can change the volume, you can change the decibel level by changing a stop or some sort of mechanical, you can play a whole section at a different level, You
want to describe a Mannheim concerto?
But with a crescendo, you have a group of instruments that can very gradually change their dynamic and get louder and louder, and that's actually a very impressive thing. And, that happens in things like the Beethoven violin concerto. You have this crescendo and this big thing. And I often, when I hear these things, I think we need to think of the crescendo as the event. Sometimes we tend to think of the goal, where the crescendo is a means of getting from soft to loud. But in fact, the crescendo itself was the event, in many ways. The path itself was the event.
I noticed that in the runs you did in the first movement, that there was a whole arc to them, because I listened to several other recordings too while I was preparing, and Harlan's playing them like, oh, these are fun exercises, but yours were like, we are definitely heading there.
I think that was intentional. No, what do you think, Jacobsons?
For sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think one thing I appreciate just is about the work we did with Gil on this piece was just that sense of being really integrated and so communicative with the orchestra, as we were talking about earlier. And then I think also just the idea that even though what you just said at the beginning of this conversation about, this is so perfect and every note is so perfect, but there was a sense of the living aspect of this. Like, you were not bowed down by Beethoven's perfection. You weren't going to be like, I'm here and you're up here, but we're going to enjoy this. Actually, it's supposed to be enjoyed. It's not supposed to be so prayerful that you can't touch it, and it's over there somewhere.
I think that's right. I think there's really very few joys like the joy of playing Beethoven, and maybe especially this piece. And I think a lot of it is some very immediate effects. I think that opening, there's something very military about 4 jagged drum beats, and then you have the kind of wind band. It's hard. I hate to use the word revolutionary again, but these were revolutionary times. And somebody pointed out that Czerny's metronome marking for the Beethoven violin concerto. So Czerny wrote the metronome marking for the piano version of Beethoven's violin concerto is 126, which is the same marking as the Marseillaise, and so there is something, I think you hear 4 beats on the drum and you're supposed to be like, what? This isn't even music,
How is that to start a violin concerto? Yes.
And how did that start a violin? Although it's really so wonderful how the drum is like a consonant to the vowels of the violin. It really is something very perfect about that. But I think, there's some real clear effects that are meant to move the audience. There's something about the spirit and maybe ultimately the plot arc of the piece. And I'll stop talking after this, but maybe there's something about this very military, the strings pick up on those drum beats, and then they come out with a kind of a new melody in the minor mode, and they go again very military, I think. Somehow this melody has such a stormy feel and a D minor feel and this alla breve feel. And as the concerto goes along, maybe 25 minutes later, this melody becomes. And so somehow it's transformed into the major mode. It's transformed into something quite profound, And of course, in the end of the piece, the melody comes back as the main melody of the rondo dance. And you feel like, oh, I've heard this melody before. That's because you have, it comes in. And so that's my little spiel, and I'll put the violin down.
Another thing I noticed, speaking of the third movement, and this is Quetzal, by the way.
Yes, I was going to say.
Joined
the cat who composes.
My Quetzal, yeah. Anyway, but another thing I noticed in your recording is you articulate that differently the different times you play it. And I wondered whether you looked at Beethoven's score for this, because I know Nick Kitchens, when he of the Borromeo Quartet, is fanatical about following everything. Eric, are you fanatical about looking to see exactly what Beethoven put in there?
Sure. I think every marking that a composer writes is a possible window into the spirit of what the composer wanted. This piece in particular, Gil, you often point this out. He didn't even finish writing the last movement in a lot of ways. He kind of wrote the dot/dot, like Control C, Control V, copy and paste that he would have done on Sibelius, because as Gil said, he ran out of time writing the thing, and he knew what he wanted, and he instructed us how to do it. I love looking at manuscripts and seeing the handwriting of someone, which I find sad that composers today, most of them don't write by hand. Some write by hand at first and then engrave it, but some don't. And even though there's such clarity with computer annotation, something so beautiful about seeing Beethoven write something and be clear, and then sometimes not be clear. And honestly, even when he is so clear and he has a dot and a dash, and he has a slur and a dynamic marking and a marking in Italian, even that leaves so much to interpretation. And I think maybe that's one of those great things about timeless music and music that's truly great, is it's just going to be great in 100 different ways. And at some point, one has to make a decision, because you have to communicate one thing. Just like when you're reading great poetry and you're going to perform that, whether it's a Shakespeare play or something, and you must embody that character. Well, you can't split the difference. You can't go between one version and another. Let's compromise. No, it has to be with sheer confidence that this is what Beethoven would have wanted, and I believe in this. And then the next night it can be different. So that's all. It's not a cop-out, but it's, you look at every single marking, and I think they're all so important. And you try to incorporate all those markings. And then you say, what did he mean? What did he want it to sound like? And then how to use all of those markings to make your case for how to actually, transcribe this into physical playing and then to an audience.
Beethoven did not write cadenzas for the violin concerto, but nearly 36 other composers did write cadenzas for it, including Colin Jacobson. Gil,
Beautiful cadenza.
why you chose the cadenzas by Fritz Kreisler?
Well, I feel like we should maybe let Colin talk about this, because I do love your cadenzas.
Oh, I mean, thank you. I think that when I was at Juilliard studying with Robert Mann, I worked on the Beethoven concerto with him, and he, I think he told me that I had to write one or else he would fail me. But I think then he forgot about that. And so I didn't at the time. But I always had it in mind that I should at some point, especially at some point when I started writing more music. And I would sometimes play, a Mozart concerto or Beethoven. I would say, if I'm writing music, I should be writing the cadenza for this. I should do it. So the last time I played the solo part was with Eric in Orlando. And I said, all right, this is the time. I'm going to do it this time. And so I did. And that was a couple of years ago. And it was really, what I love about the process of writing a cadenza is it allows you to really get inside of the composer's brain in a parallel way. And in a way, my process for writing them was to make a catalog of all the things that I enjoyed in the Beethoven concerto, and then play with them, improvise with them. And then, you start to find your way. I really enjoyed doing it. I would say the Kreisler is the one that I played until I wrote my own, because it is so beautiful, and it's just so great.
Can you give us maybe a tiny little comparison of a few bars of what Kreisler did and what you did in the same spot?
Well, it's hard to say the same spot, because you could say the easiest thing to do would be tops and tails, right? Like how you get out of the orchestral tutti and then how you get back into it. That we could compare. But then the fantasy in between, that's where it goes off. But we could do that if you want. You first, Gil, or me? Violin just went crazy. The heat going on. What was that?
I do love these Kreisler cadenzas. I've always loved everything about Fritz Kreisler. I love his original compositions. And I do think that these particular cadenzas to the Beethoven concerto are masterpieces, I don't know. Colin, which portion should we play?
Okay, let's do a Kreisler, Jacobson, Kreisler. How's that?
Okay. Which part?
I'll give you the.
I'm getting some funny feedback. I don't know if you and then it continues from there.
Mm-hmm.
And if
I'll stop there.
Bravo.
Great.
Yes.
Bravo.
That was great. I want to make sure that we get to the questions that we have here. I don't want to run out of time for that. And in fact, one of the questions is something I was also wanting to talk to you about. With the Knights, will this performance of Beethoven's violin concerto have an orchestra more like the size that it might have been in Beethoven's time? So this leads to how you're going to be performing it at 92Y.
Yeah.
Necessity is the mother of invention, right? I'll let you guys take this. Yes.
Well, the recording itself is about the size that Beethoven would have had. You know, he wrote specific instruments, meaning one flute, two oboes, two clarinets, two bassoons, two horns, two trumpets, timpani, and strings. And strings is a little bit up in the air. I think, you know, probably, Gil, when you played this piece with the New York Philharmonic, there might be 12 first violins, maybe 10, maybe 14, depending. And we had 7 first violins, 4 cellos, and 3 basses. So more or less 7 first violins, 6 second violins, 5 violas, 4 cellos, and 3 basses. It's actually pretty close to what Beethoven probably had during his time. It was there are fun writings where he says, "Oh, I'd rather have 1 first violin and 9 bass players," things like that, because he wanted the. But it was probably similar. And maybe I'll hand it to Colin to talk about the arrangement that we'll be doing next week.
Sure. Well, I mean, as Gil said, necessity, mother of invention, and so we're doing what we're calling the pocket concerto version of this. And what the program starts with the Prometheus, the Creatures of Prometheus overture by Beethoven. And Hummel made a version of that, the composer, for flute, violin, cello, and piano. And there were tons, and he arranged all the symphonies and many of the overtures for that combination. And of course, in the 19th century, or 18th century, 19th century, no radio, no recordings. Music was very participatory. So if you wanted to experience a Beethoven symphony and you weren't there for the premiere, it might be a long time before you got to experience it again. So people were making arrangements left and right for the living room and for people's homes so that they could participate. And I love that idea. And I love the fact that it really connects to the origin story of the Knights being more or less a group of friends, house music, in our living room. And that's where many of the bonds of friendship that formed the Knights and keep us animated happen. So this is not unlike something we might have read in those early days of the Knights. And I love the idea that from the stage of 92nd Street Y, we will be attempting to create that living room feeling beamed directly to everyone's living room. So I'm excited. So what we're doing with the concerto is it's the same instrumentation of flute, violin, cello, and piano, but because of the timpani's great importance, we're adding the big beast of the timpani into that. So it's a very unusual thing, and we're going to experiment and see how it comes out, and we're very excited.
And it's a little related to the COVID restrictions, right? It's really.
Yeah, I mean, we can't bring the full orchestra of the Knights to the stage at this moment. So, but we really wanted to share this Beethoven at the moment of the album coming out and getting a chance to work with Gil. And I mean, I think what Gil does when we are with the big orchestra is shrink the sense and of the, it make us more an intimate body and make it feel like chamber music. So we're going to actually do this in a very intimate way together.
And I do love this feeling of experimentation, which is this feeling that I got from the Knights, from your performance of the Third Symphony of the Eroica Symphony, that it feels fresh. It feels like an experiment. It feels like what it must have felt like for Beethoven to first premiere the Third Symphony or to first premiere the Violin Concerto. Whether we love it or not, it is interesting to note that these things did happen all the time. Even Joachim himself, for the premiere of Brahms' Violin Concerto, went and toured the concerto with Johannes Brahms at the piano, and they played in concert a duo version of the Brahms Violin Concerto.
Right, actually, there's a real history of this. So Hummel, a contemporary of Beethoven, arranging symphonies, Liszt transcribing for piano the Beethoven symphonies. And though it's not really done so often now, often European artists would come to America and 100 years ago and tour around with a pianist, and a concerto was on their recital repertoire. Because why not? It's such great music. And
I think Chrysler toured
Yes.
the Beethoven Violin Concerto with a pianist, right?
I don't remember the Beethoven, but I do remember programs where he would play Beethoven Kreutzer Sonata, and then he would play the Bruch Violin Concerto for violin and piano,
Yeah.
So speaking of the pandemic and its restrictions, another question we got was, what kind of creative ways have you discovered during this time to perform music, both virtually and in person? And that goes to Gil, you're in LA, and Eric, you're in Virginia, and Colin, you just flew home to New York. So you want to answer that question?
I'll jump off. I mean, this was the second time I've taken an airplane in the last year, so it's and so now I'm quarantining here in Brooklyn. It's a crazy thing, a crazy time. But with the nights, we have done a number of the kind of virtual recording with boxes, and I would say that one is about to come out. And speaking of Beethoven, I think really speaks to trying to make lemonade out of lemons and to have a creative answer. And that is a piece we're calling Keeping On. And it has a kernel of an idea from Beethoven. And I was playing with that idea and sent a sketch around to about 10 folks in the Nights who I thought would be interested in responding themselves. There are composers, arrangers within the group. And they came back with beautiful sketches. And then Mike Atkinson, the horn player and a composer arranger himself, and I worked to stitch these together into a piece. And it's really a statement of the orchestra moving forward in this difficult time by having a creative response. So at the end of this month, that will be coming out, and I'm excited about that.
How cool. How cool.
Anybody else?
Well, early on, we did some really fun things together with Gil and Adele.
That's what I was thinking of, yes.
Yeah. I mean, the first one, we talked to Gil and Adele and said, hey, why don't you play the Bach double and then send it to us? So they videotaped themselves and recorded themselves with two different cameras, made the recording, sent it to us. Colin and I played Colin played the violin orchestra part, the second violin orchestra, the viola part. I played the cello part and the viola part. And we put it all together in our, I guess we can do a little bit of engineering, and made a video of it. It's actually hysterical in that like some music falls by accident, but somehow it all stays together. And I think we all kind of use that as a pastime and also a way to connect, because we were lonely. I think everyone has been lonely to some degree during this time and wanting to connect with dear friends. We made a handful of other videos, and they're all fun, and some sound very good and some don't. And that's kind of like, where it's been. I feel like
but Eric was the video you were the editor for all of these. You became a videographer for a while during this time, and so Eric's humorous touch is on these videos, and I encourage people to check them out because they're fun. They're really fun.
But really, if the question is about music, that's maybe one fun thing. But I think about life, I think everyone has figured out another way to be with their family and friends, or try. And for me, that's what this time was. It was about being with family in a way that I'd never been before, never knew I could be, and how that translates to music. That growth process, I think, is pretty unique.
In a way, these tragic, traumatic times have made all of us maybe appreciate things we used to take for granted before, and maybe hearing music, having music, studying music, making music seems that much. I don't know. Maybe that much more human. Somehow there's something so precious about it that we all appreciate it that much more now.
I think that's a great place to end, except that, Gil, I want to ask about the violin you play.
Yes, thank you. I'm so happy you did, because I was very lucky for the recording and today too to play on a beautiful Stradivarius violin from 1719, from the year 1719, called the Haupt Stradivarius, which was lent to me through the generosity of a foundation based in New York called In Consortium Violins, that makes it possible for people like me to have the ability to use the voice of such wonderful instruments.
I remember when Gil first brought it to the session and he said, I think it's a monster.
Oh no. it's really wonderful.
It is.
And I really do enjoy playing. Yeah, poor Colin and Eric. I was after them. I was like, what do you think? What do you think of this? What do you think of that?
So good.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Gil, Shaham, Eric Jacobson, Colin Jacobson. Thank you for your wit, your wisdom, your music this evening on Inside the Concert from 92Y School of Music. March 14th, a week from Sunday, is the date for the 92Y performance featuring Gil Shaham and members of the Knights, including Colin Jacobson, plus Gil Shaham's wife, Adele Anthony. They will perform the Beethoven Violin Concerto, Beethoven's Overture to the Creatures of Prometheus, and the String Quartet No. 5 by Joseph Bologne. That concert will be streamed live on March 14th and available online for another week. There is a link to get tickets on YouTube and in chat, and there is also a link, including a discount, to get a copy of the new, hold up the CD please, again, recording of the Beethoven and Brahms violin concertos with Gil Shaham and the Knights. And it is truly a wonderful recording.
And artwork by Alex Sapp, the flutist, who will also be performing on March 14th.
Who will be with us, yes.
Excellent. Thank you to everyone out there in Zoom land for joining us and for your questions. Next up on Inside the Concert, I will talk to guitarist Jason Vio on April 5th, and then flutist Brandon Patrick George on April 22nd. There's a link to register for those in chat, and if you can, please make a contribution to support all the programming at 92Y. Thanks again, and see you on April 5th.
Thank you, Naomi.
Thanks, Naomi.
Thank you, Naomi.